So Psycho Killer was written by the dude who wrote Seven, and like that movie, it features a religiously inspired psychopath on a killing spree, and yet the marketing push for this movie has been practically non-existent. So what does that tell you? I saw one trailer for the movie in theaters last week and thought it was effective enough. It didn't show you too much, but kind of got me a little bit interested. In this case, there's a reason it didn't show you too much. It was hiding the rest of the runtime. This is one of the most aimless, worthless, boring movies I have seen in years. Early on, the main character, who's a cop played by Georgina Campbell from Barbarian, watches her husband get gunned down by this killer and spends the rest of the movie hot on his tail. So grief, trauma, vengeance, all of these things are on the table, but none of them are portrayed effectively. Every single aspect of this movie feels completely obligatory. Like, of course the authorities need to not trust this protagonist because that's just how these movies go, right? And so at one point, she's drawing similarities between the killings that are happening in this movie and some murders that happened years before. And a representative of the FBI looks her dead in the eye and says, well, that guy was a mass murderer, and our killer here, his MO is more serial in nature, so we can really rule that one out. And that's just supposed to be enough of an explanation to not investigate that lead further. And so our protagonist is semi on her own as she's hunting this guy down. And pretty much every single one of her scenes is either her on site with this killer about to have a physical confrontation with him, or her in a library researching and learning more about what might be his motive. There are so many scenes in libraries in this movie, and she's like on 8chan, a site I didn't even know existed, looking at heavy metal bands and things like that. It's totally ridiculous. Now, one thing that the screenplay does that could have been interesting is it spends almost equal amounts of time with the killer as it does with the cop. The problem is that the longer we spend with this serial killer, the less frightening he becomes. The wardrobe isn't used particularly well. He's in like this trench coat and a gas mask, but it doesn't use the mask the way that horror movies should use masks. It like frequently tries to give us a closer look at what his expression is beneath the mask. It'll like zoom in on his goggles and show us his eyes widening. And it's like the function of this wardrobe is that it kind of robs him of having these sorts of reactions. So why are you going out of your way to undo the heavy lifting that the mask could be doing to make this character scary? And he's always in this dadgum mask. He's approaching normal people with this mask on, and they'll like actually engage with him. It does not make any sense. I don't know what world this is taking place in. And we get this super overwritten scene where he explains to a priest like how his past has kind of led him to be this way. It's so cliche and basic and just not even first draft stuff. Then eventually he reaches out to some like minds, some fellow devil worshippers. He does it by taking out an ad in the newspaper, and they get back to him in coded language, but it's like the most breakable code imaginable. I think anyone over the age of 12 could probably figure it out. And then once he shows up on site and he's about to meet the leader of this group, the assistant takes him to the house in a golf cart, mind you, which, pro tip, if you're writing a horror screenplay, don't put your psycho killer in a golf cart. It's very hard to take seriously. And then when we meet the leader of this cult, he's sitting around the table with like a half dozen millennials with piercings and spiky hair, eating Chinese takeout and discussing the pharmaceutical industry. That's what this movie thought was going to be effective. And this scene ends with a very video game slaughter fest with CGI blood. It just looks horrible. It's one of the worst looking things I've seen in a theater in a long time. And the Satanism in this movie is not used to do anything interesting. It feels like it's just a way of taking something very provocative and using well-known imagery that can generate public fear and then doing nothing with it, essentially. There's some early scenes where we hear Malcolm McDowell's character as the leader of this movement on the radio talking about how painkillers and substances like that are like the devil's work in our society, something to that effect. And that's actually kind of interesting. I've always thought the idea of having substance abuse and addiction being a form of possession, that's kind of compelling. It's somewhat similar to what Stephen King did with The Shining, honestly. But again, it goes nowhere. Nothing is done with that idea. And this psycho killer, and I keep calling him that because that's how he's credited. He might have had a name, I don't remember. But he's supposed to be like the most devoted member of this movement. And once we can see where he's going and what his objective is, we realize how stupidly he's been acting for the entire runtime. The project he's working on is allegedly way more important to him than the individual killings he's doing on the way, so I don't know why he decided to leave a trail of bodies across the country leading right to where he was going, putting every cop on his trail. It's just it's inexplicably dumb. And the screenplay doesn't know what to do with the protagonist either. It's revealed very early on that she's pregnant. Like, she finds out shortly after her husband died that she's gonna have a baby. Nothing happens with that. It doesn't add anything to her character. At a certain point, she's in a diner, and on the table is what to expect when you're expecting. So we are to believe that, like, 72 hours into her manhunt for the dude who murdered her husband right in front of her, she stopped by a bookstore and picked up a copy of this book, and then, like, cracked it open in the middle of researching this Satanist serial killer who's in the middle of executing a heinous crime against humanity. Maybe they thought it would make her more relatable. It doesn't work. And every time these two characters collide, it's so lame. They make horrible decisions where it feels like they want the other one to stay alive and have a fighting chance. And right up to the finale, there's just no tension. The dynamic between them and the way that it unfolds in the climax of the movie is so boring. The way that this protagonist finally has to confront the villain feels totally weightless. I felt like negative emotions, like not even nothing, less than nothing. And then somehow from that point, it gets even worse. The final two scenes of this movie are so bad. Again, I don't know what else to say, but like, it's not even first draft. It's the kind of thing that you might think of and be like, that's dumb. It shouldn't even make it onto the page. And I have not even begun to touch on the technical aspects of this movie, from the shadowy cinematography to the editing where each new shot doesn't really reveal any new information. There's so many unnecessary shots in this movie. But also there's a moment where, like, it seems like a plane is passing by overhead and it just drowns out what the characters are saying for like a pretty substantial amount of time, and they're discussing something pretty important. And there are lines that were clearly dubbed in post-production in the finale, so I don't know why they didn't dub in the moments that were drowned out by the plane. It's like, I can't wrap my head around how this movie was available on the big screen for me this weekend. Do not watch this movie. I think you would be hard-pressed to find a worse use of your time. Avoid it like the plague. It is truly egregious. Psycho Killer gets an F. If this isn't the worst movie that I see this year, we're in trouble, man. If you for some reason have seen it, love to hear your thoughts on it. If you enjoyed this video, please do like and subscribe, and I'll catch you at the movies.